Hi Islanders, this is Hana, and welcome back to my island. July 4th, 2026. America turned 250 years old that day. A black woman sits on a train heading into Washington. She's young, wearing a green t-shirt. Around her stand dozens of men, their faces hidden behind white masks. They belong to a white nationalist group called Patriot Front. Fascist symbols are printed on their caps. In their hands, they carry the American flag and the Confederate flag. What is a Confederate flag? It's the banner of the South, the side that split the country in two to keep slavery alive. And it's the emblem the KKK, the white supremacist terror group, flew every time they lynched a black person. So this woman is sitting alone, right in the middle of a history that has treated her as less than human. And she's doing it on July 4th, 2026, the 250th birthday of the nation. A Reuters photographer named Cheney Orr captured the scene. The photo spread around the world in an instant. Some called it pleasure material. Others said it would define this era of America for years to come. I agree with them, but that's not the real reason I couldn't look away. She wasn't looking down. She wasn't shrinking into herself. She was facing the camera. She was facing the whole world around her head on. Not because she felt no fear. Trapped on a train with nowhere to run, surrounded by a masked crowd, who wouldn't be afraid? Her calm doesn't belong to someone who feels no fear. It belongs to someone who feels it and refuses to hand it over. For a Black woman, holding your face steady in a moment like this is an old grammar of survivor. Elizabeth Eckford did it in Little Rock in 1957, walking alone past a screaming mob to integrate a white high school. Aisha Evans did it in Baton Rouge in 2016, standing alone before a line of armored police. Human dignity sometimes wears a face like this. That same day, President Trump took the stage at the 250th anniversary and called for stamping out communism. In New York, Joram Mamdani had won the mayor's race on a Democratic Socialist platform. Other politicians with similar leanings were rising right behind him. With the November midterms coming, his words were meant to brand that whole movement as communist. He said communism is like a cancer, that it has to be cut out fast, and that America never wants communists here. Just like McCarthyism in the 1950s, those 1950s witch hunts that branded Americans as secret communists, labeling people, insulting them into camps, doesn't bring a country together. It splits it apart. It's a tool for pointing at an enemy. The moment you call someone a tumor to be cut out, that person stops being a human being. They become something to remove. The next day, Interior Secretary Doug Burgum went on air and spoke about the Patriot Front March. He said he doesn't agree with the values they stand for, but that freedom of speech is founding principle of America. It wasn't open support, but it wasn't condemnation either. It was the language of stepping back one pace behind the principle. And that single step turned a march of masked racists into a day the state chose to look past. Freedom of speech. Haven't we heard that somewhere before? Across the ocean, here in South Korea, the very same phrase is echoing. The baseball team at Seoul High School, Paeje, chanted a cheer all together, mocking the Gwangju Uprising. Let me explain what that was. In May of 1980, Korea's military dictatorship sent soldiers into the southern city of Gwangju and killed hundreds of ordinary citizens who were asking for democracy. We called it 5/18 after the date it begins, May 18th. So these teenagers in unison mocked people killed by state violence in a city where the families of the dead are still alive and breathing. The team was banned from competition for 6 months. Then a man named Lee Byung-tae spoke up. He was the vice chair of a regulatory reform committee that reports directly to the president. He said punishing people for what they say is a denial of their basic rights. He said even shouting, "Long live Kim Il-sung," the name of North Korea's founder and our old enemy, in the middle of Seoul should be allowed. He said 5/18 has become a sacred cow in this country, something untouchable. But where in the world is there a sacred cow that's persecuted? And the phrase he kept reaching for was freedom of speech. This man is a professor emeritus at KAIST, Korea's top science and technology university. President Lee Jae-myung's government brought him in from the conservative side in the name of unity and pragmatism. An educated man, someone trained by knowledge, used that knowledge to tear open Gwangju's wounds all over again. The more educated a person is, the more elegantly they can wrap up violence. And that fact wears you down. There is something here we can't afford to miss. Whose right was freedom of speech to begin with? It was built to protect the weak, the ones crushed under power so they could speak without fear. It's the right of the powerless to say no to the powerful. But right now, that idea is being flipped completely on its head into a right for the strong majority, or those leaning on power to pour hatred onto minorities and victims. A logic that shields the students mocking Gwangju's grieving families while never once mentioning the freedom of those families. That's the exact face of this distortion. The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution guarantees freedom of speech, so Patriot Front can carry the Confederate flag and shout racist slogans without being punished. So what about the Second Amendment? That's the right to bear arms. So could the woman in the photo, if she felt the men around her were a threat, fire a gun at them? No, the law doesn't work in such a tidy, symmetrical way. For self-defense to hold up, there has to be a reasonable belief that someone is about to seriously harm you. An imminent threat, in other words. There has to be a clear act. A raised fist, a drawn weapon. Just being surrounded by masked people sitting quietly, however menacing their presence, is not a threat in the eyes of the law. I sat with this imbalance for a long time. On one side, a vast freedom wide enough to embrace even hateful speech. On the other, a narrow right that only kicks in after you've actually been hit. The aggressor's freedom to hate is thrown wide open. The victim's freedom to defend herself is bolted shut. Even if those men suddenly turned and attacked her, she could only fight back after the violence was already done, when it's already too late. Washington has hate crime laws that punish crimes driven by prejudice more harshly. It has laws against the threats and stalking too. But all of these laws need a concrete act before they move. And here's the problem. You can threaten and crush your whole race symbolically or without laying a single finger on anyone. There are countless ways. Covering your face, surrounding one person with a crowd, raising the flag of slavery. The net of the law can't catch it. But to the person on the receiving end, it is unmistakably violence. As long as the law is woven only around the physical wounds, this kind of threat will always slip through. Someone might say, isn't Patriot Front just a group of 500 or so? An extreme loud little minority. And that's fair. Leaked international documents put their membership at around 540 people across the entire country. Against the whole US population, that's a speck of dust. But we shouldn't take that number at face value. The Anti-Defamation League, a US organization that tracks hate groups, found that in 2021 alone, this one group was behind 82% of the racist and anti-Semitic hate propaganda incidents in the country. How do 500 people produce a number like that? The answer is staging. Matching uniforms, white masks, a march in perfect formation. All of it is a strategy. Hide the real size and look far bigger and more menacing than you are. Being small and looking small are two different things. We shouldn't be fooled by that word, just. Hitler's Nazi Party was nothing more than a fringe party in Munich at first. In the 1928 election, they won 2.6% of the vote. No one took them seriously. Everything flipped the next year when the Great Depression hit. Millions lost their jobs. When the government couldn't ease their pain, the Nazis aimed all that anger at scapegoats. Jews, communists. 18% in 1930, 37% in 1932. And the establishment conservatives, sure they could keep these people under control, handed Hitler the chancellorship. They were wrong. For that minority to finally seize power, three things came together: a crisis in society, organized propaganda, and the quiet complicity of the powerful. 100 years later, those same three are gathering again. We are in the middle of a great AI transformation. A handful of big tech companies are drawing in the world's wealth. The profits this technology creates and the jobs it takes away never land on the same people. In call centers, at desks, on factory floors, in white-collar professions, somewhere in the middle of the office, people are being pushed out. Just like the Great Depression, the anxiety of mass unemployment always turns into an arrow aimed at someone. The organized propaganda is already in place. When Trump calls communism a cancer and points to an enemy, the form of it echoes how the Nazi pointed at the Jews. And the complicity. That one step back behind the principle taken by Secretary Burgum, that is the complicity. Being few is no reason to relax. Every minority started out as a minority. They come to overpower the majority not because of their numbers, but because the people in positions of power stay silent instead of condemning them. But there is something strange about Korea's far right, something that sets it apart from the far right elsewhere in the world. Far right movements abroad usually aim outward. Patriot Front in America, the far right parties in Europe, they pour their hatred onto outside. Immigrants, other races, other religions. There's a logic of our country first behind it. But Korea's far right builds its identity around loyalty to America and to Japan, and then turns the blade inward. Jeju 4-3, Gwangju 5-18, the Seoul Ferry incident. Let me name this for you. Jeju 4-3 was a massacre that began in 1948 when state forces killed tens of thousands of islanders. The sailor was the 2014 ferry sinking that drawn more than 300 people, most of them high school students, while the state failed to save them. These are the places where our own people died from state violence or state incompetence. And it's a force from inside our own country that mocks them. This is hatred aimed not at an outsider, but at victims within. So why did this distortion take hold? The ones responsible for Jeju 43 and Gwangju 518 were our own government, and the Cold War anti-communist order that propped it up. For people who hold loyalty to America and Japan as an article of faith, fully admitting these tragedies would mean admitting the guilt of the very system they have defended. So they try to erase the history through mockery. They believe that if they turn the victims into a joke, the system that caused their death will grow lighter, too. This is why Korean hatred is so sharply pointed at victims in particular. So, how large is this far right in South Korea, really? I wanted to know the truth of it precisely, because we shouldn't underestimate it, and we shouldn't be more frightened than we need to be. In March 2025, a research center at Yonsei University, together with a polling firm, surveyed thousands of adults. 21% of them were classified as being far-right leanings. That's 1 in 5. Hardly a speck of dust. What even more striking is how it breaks down by age. 29% among people in their 70s and older, and 28% among people in their 20s. It's a U-shaped curve that breaks the common belief that the far right belongs to the elderly. Among people in their 20s, 33% of the men leaned far right. That's 1.5 times the rate for women. Which means this isn't a problem that will simply fade as the generations turn over. Still, that same survey holds some hope. Many of those classified as far right actually saw themselves as moderate or progressive. And most of them felt they had almost no political voice. A sense of being left out, of feeling the government doesn't care about people like them. A thirst for anyone, to understand what they think. This is an attitude that grew out of that soil. When it came to actual physical violence, like the riot where a mob broke into a Seoul courthouse, even among people in their 20s and 30s, 8 out of 10 did not condone it. So this 21% isn't a fist that's already clenched. It's water that can still flow in any direction. We still have hope. There's still time to turn this around, which is exactly why the government and the ruling party need to wake up and do their job well, starting now. Maybe this is our last chance. Where the water flows depends, in the end, on the people who build the banks. Look at Germany. It's called a model for civic education. When I was living abroad, I met a lot of German friends. They were all so reasonable, so good at debate, and they always carried a real respect for the person across from them. For over half a century, Germany has held to the Wittelsbach Consensus of 1976. It's a teaching principle that says you must not force any single viewpoint onto students. And yet, in that country, the far-right party, AfD Alternatives for Germany, now leads in the polls. They became the second largest party in the 2025 federal election. Then, into 2026, they climbed to 29% and passed the governing party. This is a party that Germany's own domestic intelligence agency has labeled a confirmed right-wing extremist organization. It's time to correct the habit of holding Germany up as the model. Beitelsbau is model for its method, not for its result. Even a country that has taught civics for half a century can see the far right surge like this when crisis and complicity overlap. If anything, that's proof that education alone can't hold back this tide. De-established parties promised a firewall, a vow never to join hands with the far right. But when they cross it at the moment of a vote, whenever it's convenient, the wall crumbles from the inside. And Korea? Chang Dong-hyuk, the leader of the Conservative People Power Party, called his own win a victory driven by a new media environment. And that media meant one thing. A far-right YouTuber named Chun Han-gil, who defended the December 3rd martial law when Korea's president tried to seize emergency powers and who pushed the claims of election fraud. In early 2026, another far-right YouTuber, Ko Sung-guk, joined the party. He too had defended the December 3rd martial law. And according to the National Intelligence Service, there are signs he spoke by phone beforehand with the man who attacked Lee Jae-myung back when Lee was still the opposition leader, stabbed in the neck during a visit to Busan in January of 2024, almost a year and a half before he became president. A senior party official personally sponsored him and accepted his membership application. Far from filtering the far right out, the party leadership is holding up that bond as its engine of victory and as its identity. Everything we've talked about today is playing out most clearly and most vividly inside the main opposition party. When the powerful move past mere complicity and openly embrace the far right, a minority stops being a minority. That doesn't mean the outside is clean. I dislike the late both sides are equally bad argument, but I dislike dishonest cheerleading even more. On the Democratic Party side too, hardline YouTubers like Kim Eo-jun and Jae-myung have grown far too powerful. Millions of subscribers, hundreds of thousands watching live at once. Presidential candidates go on their shows instead of the mainstream press. There's even a joke that the number one figure in the power hierarchy is Kim Eo-jun. Democratic Party lawmakers show up on his show, bow their heads, and fill his coffers with donations. Now, the texture of this is a little different. These men aren't a problem because they mock historical tragedy. They are a problem because of unverified conspiracy theories and because an unelected individual holds the power to shape the decisions of an official political party. The root is the same. Party politics is being eaten away by the media power of YouTuber. Even so, I try not to despair because there was a fork in the road. Faced with the same phrase, freedom of speech, America's Interior Secretary stepped back behind the principle. Korea's presidential office, by contrast, recommended a resignation. Vice Chair Lee Byung-tae stepped down from his post. The president's political affairs secretary said, the free speech of a public official can be different from the free speech of a private individual. And that put a finger on exactly the right spot. Freedom of speech is the right not to go to prison. It's not the right to keep your reputation and people's trust. The Bae baseball team was penalized. Lee Byung-tae lost his seat. Where the state could not step in with a criminal punishment, the criticism of civic society and the demand for public accountability filled the gap. And what pushed that force all the way through wasn't the government cleaning up its own house. It was public opinion and the tireless pressure of ordinary citizens. So the way across this age of hatred doesn't lie in one dramatic solution. Three things have to move together. First, we show the reality for exactly what it is. Just calling 540 people is enough to deflate all the menace they worked so hard to inflate, like a balloon with the air let out. Second, we can't leave the roots of the anxiety untended. Condemning the hatred while leaving the AI-driven job losses and the widening gap in place is like handling a feverish person a single pill and treating nothing underneath. And third, the power that stays silent must be made to pay the price of that silence. And one more thing. The fact that the far right still uses Jeju 43, Gwangju 518, and the Seoul Ferry as material for mockery means those wounds still remain unpaid debt our society has not fully mourned. Condemning each act of mockery one by one isn't enough. Only when we mourn those wounds as a society and hold the responsibility to account does the soil where mockery grows finally dry up. Fascism is closer than we think, but it doesn't fall out of the sky one day all at once. It seeps in through the ordinary face in the seat next to ours. The moment we call them monsters and push them outside the human cycle, we miss the more frightening truth. That face is our neighbor, someone our own society raised. The monster doesn't come from outside. The monster grows within us. I come back one more time to the gaze of that black woman on the Washington train. Trapped with nowhere to run, surrounded by a masked crowd, she held her head up and looked the world straight in the eye. And I believe her gaze is asking us a question. What are you looking at right now? So, what did you think? I'm curious how your country, your community deals with the hate speech carried out in the name of freedom of speech. And as I always say, the reason I lay out my own country's faults and its dark side so openly right here in front of you, my fellow islanders, is this. The conversation starts with Korea, but in the end, it holds true anywhere human beings live together. I hope that through the mirror of Korea, you too can look back at yourself, your society, your nation, and think together with me about what alternatives and solutions might look like. That's one of the reasons I run this channel. All right, if this video resonates with you, please support me with a like and a subscribe. And if you'd like to help my channel grow, consider joining the membership. This has been Hana's Island. Here you're safe. Rest easy on the island that sits at just your latitude. Take care. Bye.